Okay, so welcome everyone to the 2021 Virtual Forum for Excellence. To this first initial morning session. We are so excited you are joining us today. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator for today's session. I'm joined by my colleague Todd Jorns from the Illinois Community College Board, and he's going to be our technical support for today's session. So feel free to reach out to him if you experience any technical difficulties, or you can reach out to me as well, and we will try to help you throughout this session. This breakout session is titled Building Bridges, Best, Better Practices in Educating Justice. And we are joined by our presenter, Jeffrey Abramowitz. I'm sorry, Jeff, if I butchered your last name there.
You got it.
Okay, well, awesome. I'm happy I spelled it out then or pronounced it out. So again, we are your moderators and technical support for this session, so feel free to reach out to us. We wanted to recognize that all of you attendees have the ability on this session to unmute yourselves. So this is different from the general session. You have the ability to unmute yourselves, but we ask that you refrain from doing this until the end of the session when we have our live Q&A portion with Jeff. But if you do have questions or comments as the session proceeds, we ask that you post those in the Zoom chat. So if you're joining us through the Whova app, you probably see that the Whova app has a chat function, and we want to disregard that Whova chat. We want to use the Zoom chat in your Zoom window for this live session, and we're going to hold that Whova chat for after the session. If you have follow-up questions, or if someone's watching the recording of this, you can ask questions within the Whova chat. But for the live session, we're going to just use the Zoom chat. So I urge you all to use that for any questions that you want to keep readily in your mind, and you can always feel free to ask them live at the end too. We'll be stopping and pausing for some questions throughout with Jeff as well. And then today's presentation was actually not provided right now. We're going to focus on the presenter, but Jeff will be providing today's slide deck and any handouts that he has, so you can have it after the presentation. So we will get those up on the Whova app as soon as possible and up on our website as well. I will post that website for you in the chat momentarily. And then one more thing, if you are looking for a certificate of PD, those will come out in 2 weeks after the conference. So if you need a certificate of PD, your name will need to be accurate in this Zoom meeting. So make sure you have your accurate participant name, your first and last name on the Zoom meeting. So that way we have that for attendance purposes for those PD certificates. And then we also wanted to mention you can access the on-demand sessions between sessions today, or maybe at lunch. If you would like to watch any of those on-demand sessions, you can access those under the resources, under the Whova app, under resources, under on-demand, and it will take you to all those on-demand sessions. And then with that, I'm gonna hand it off to our presenter today. Stop sharing here. Jeff, if you want to start sharing, you can take us away.
Get this up. There we go. Can you see my screen okay? I hope. There we go.
That's good.
Yes, we can see.
Good morning, everybody. And I'm so grateful to see some friends on here. Michael Matos, how are you? Some colleagues from COABE. I am Jeff Abramowitz, and I'm really glad to be here. And for the next 50 minutes to an hour, we're going to be talking building some bridges and best practices in educating justice involved individuals. Before we begin, I just kind of want to lay some ground rules and actually make an apology. I submitted this presentation under the title Best Practices in Educating Justice Involved Individuals. And there's a recent book that came out by Adam Grant. I don't know if anybody's has read it, called Think Again. And in that book, he talks about best practices and the term best practices. And he mentions the reality that when you say something is the best, sometimes you strive to do better. And he said that best practices maybe isn't the best term that we use, that we should use better practices, because we should always strive to do better and better. So I've changed my topic to better practices in educating justice involved individuals, because I think we all need to do a little bit better in this space. And we're going to talk about a lot of those challenges that we face as educators, as administrators, and the students and some of our students face. So some other ground rules for the day. They're simple. One is if you do have a question, feel free, throw it in the chat box, and I would be glad to address it. I often get frustrated when I go to workshops and I have this great question that I can't wait to get out there. And then all of a sudden, the speaker doesn't want to take questions or isn't able to, and it goes out of my head by the end of the presentation. So please feel free, unmute yourself, throw it in the chat box, and I'm going to give some time at the end to kind of go through and talk and open the door up for some other questions. The last thing is I wanted everyone to know that we're going to be going through a lot of data and talking about a lot of statistics, and I'll be sharing my presentation with you. So don't be worried about getting everything down or remembering. We're trying to remember all the things and numbers I'm going to throw at you for the next hour, because there's going to be a lot and it's all good. So I'll make sure you have the presentation and also have access to a lot of the links that I'll be sharing with you. So let's go. Buckle up. If you're sitting in an office chair, buckle up and let's get going. Today, we're going to be really talking about building bridges. And building bridges, when we talk about adult education, and is really the way I think about things, because we often we are all on journeys as teachers, as individuals. We all go through journeys on life, and we cross bridges as we make accomplishments and in things, and as we jump into new adventures. So I want you to think about our journey today as about building a bridge. And we may be doing multiple bridges, but it's all about how you see the bridge and how you build it and get it across it, not only for your staff and your students, but for yourselves. So we're going to be talking a lot about using the analogy about building bridges. And I guess I should tell you at the outset about my bridge that I've built and my personal bridge, so that you understand a little bit of the context of what we're going to be talking about today. So I said my name is Jeff. It's Jeff Abramowitz, and I was born in Philadelphia, and I'm actually talking to you today from Philadelphia in an office here. I always wanted to be a lawyer and went to law school, went to Ohio State for undergrad and Michigan State for law school, and graduated, came back to Philadelphia and started practicing law in my trade. I was a trial lawyer. I practiced in both the state and federal courts, and also before the United States Supreme Court. I was married and have a wonderful daughter. And I, at some point in my life, had reached pretty much the pinnacle of my professional career as a lawyer. And in that point, made some horrible choices. Those choices, for me, led to a federal indictment. And that federal indictment led to me standing in a courtroom. And it was March 12th of 2012. I stood in this courtroom for the first time, not as a lawyer, but as a defendant. They often say that the two most important days of your life are the day you're born, and many people say the second day is the day you die. And I would argue with that. I would say the second most important day of your life is the day you figure out why you're born. Like, why are you here on this earth? Why are you born? And for me, I could tell you pretty much down to the second, because it happened on March 12th, and it was in that courtroom that a judge's gavel struck wood, and I was sentenced to 5 years in the federal penitentiary. It was to say that was the moment in time that it was almost like an outer body experience, as marshals came and removed my belt and my tie and my shoelaces and carted me off into a holding cell, where for several hours I sat pretty much butt naked, waiting for them to find a jumpsuit that I could wear in this new environment. But while I was in this room and stripped of everything that I had, all the belongings I had, my freedom, everything that I was, I had an opportunity to begin to think about, number one, why it had happened, so I could make sure it never happened again. But two, to think about what the bigger picture was. Like, why was this happening to me? What was the purpose? And what was going to drive me forward? So I entered the prison system with this passion and also a sense of relief that one journey was ending and one door was ending and another one was opening for me. So I began inside of my prison journey of, teaching classes and taught over 55 classes in the prison that I was at. And I began learning things like changing oil on a car and doing incredible things like operating a forklift and working in a warehouse and working in an industrial kitchen. And those things were opportunities I had to learn. I learned about men, and I learned about the men that I was with. So I traveled through my journey, writing every day, voraciously reading, read over 1,000 books, really trying to better myself. But when I came home is when the real challenge began. I returned to Philadelphia 6 years ago last Sunday and lived in a shelter and was homeless and began to figure out what my next step was going to be. My first job was in a really challenging area of Philadelphia, is now one of the highest gun violence areas in our country and very high in poverty, and lived in a shelter a block away from an adult literacy agency. I walked into the agency and said, I need a job. I had taught inside of prison and I need to do something. And the director looked at me, and after some questions, she gave me an opportunity to teach GED math. Within several months, I advanced to become a director at Community Learning Center in Philadelphia, a Title II agency, which is now Beyond Literacy. It's one of the largest Title II agencies in the Commonwealth. And I found my passion. I began to understand that teaching was part of my mission, but working with adult leaders and adult students was where I was being driven to. And so my second career began as an educator. And over the past several years, I've been on this remarkable journey. I began to do reentry programming work in the city of Philadelphia. I began to do work and take leadership roles with the Pennsylvania Workforce Development Board, where the governor appointed me to sit on the board, heading the reentry committee, and then with the Attorney General's office and overseeing the reentry coalition at state level for the employment, and then began doing more and more work in the center of reentry, adult education, and workforce development. So over the past several years, I have been able to transition to a number of remarkable opportunities. I sit today in my office here in Philadelphia as an executive director of JEVS Human Services, which is one of the largest workforce development agencies in Philadelphia. And we're very diverse. We service about 45,000 men and women in Philadelphia, people that are underemployed or unemployed. We operate our Career One Stop or Career Link here in Philadelphia. We own a technical college. We have 2 methadone clinics. We have a home health care network. We have a bunch of reentry and diversion programs and oversee vocational training programs inside of the prison, both at a Philadelphia County level and also at the state level for Department of Corrections. And most recently, within the last several months, I've become a subject matter expert with the Department of Education in Washington and Octay, and I've overseen participated in several projects, including setting up correctional IET, integrated educational trainings in corrections across the country. And I am also the links moderator. If you're not on links, we'll talk about that, but links, it's links.ed.gov, is the US Department of Education's community of practice for a whole number of fields, including career pathways and math and all different educational career communities. So I challenge you to get onto the links platform and join the communities of practice. So I sit here in a kind of crazy place where I wear glasses that are much different than they once were, but as an educator, as an administrator, as a teacher, and also as a student, and someone that's returned and gone through the justice space. So that's the background that I set you up with. And now I want to set the context of the bridge. So building the bridge begins with understanding the challenges that men and women face in our criminal justice systems. And I just want to start with the facts, and you're going to be hearing a lot of the facts. So the facts are that we have over 2 million people in our country are incarcerated. We have about 1.3 million, a little bit less in our state system, about 600,000, 615,000 in our federal system, and about 200,000, a little under that now in the federal system. But we also have about 500,000 people in the United States that are in prison right now or local jails and have not even been convicted of a crime. They sit behind the walls today because they can't afford bail. Our cash bail system is severely broken, and it's one of the challenges that we have in our justice system. I was reading an article this morning that had some current data on how many people in the United States are in prison because of supervision violations, being on parole. And remarkably, about 45% of everyone that's incarcerated today is actually there because of a violation of some kind in supervision. Just the facts. 1 in 3 Black males will find themselves incarcerated during their lifetime. 1 in 18 Black women. Remarkably, there are the fastest growing population in our prison system is women and our female populations, but men and women that are Black and brown and Latino and Latina are often the most marginalized in our population and the most impacted by our criminal justice systems. We should understand that there are about 113 million people that have family members who have been incarcerated in the United States. That's about half of the adult population in the United States. We should know that 70 to 100 million people in the United States have a criminal history. That's roughly a third of our country. And to really understand that a criminal background starts with an allegation. You get your criminal background and it starts with an arrest. The second you're charged or arrested is when that record begins. And that's roughly 70 to 100 million. I believe it's probably over 100 million people currently that have some kind of criminal history that they're challenged with. So I do believe, as you can see, that a person without data is just another person with an opinion. So we should know that there are about 600,000 people that come back from prison every year. And during COVID, that number has gone up dramatically. But about 2/3 of the men and women that are in our prisons are eventually going to return to prison within 3 years. And about half will find their way back and become incarcerated again. And that's the tragedy. Now, we spend across the country $2 billion, $20 billion on our justice systems. And we fail 2/3 of the time. So there definitely is a disconnect in the work that we do in our justice systems, but we need to figure out what the solutions are. What are the answers? Well, in linking adult literacy to incarceration and the work that's being done behind and beyond our prison walls, the US economy suffers for our low literacy levels in general. There are about $2.2 trillion lost in gross national product every year. And to put that in perspective, the president today is pushing his $3.3 trillion new infrastructure bills, right? And 2.2 million of that we lose every year just in gross national product because of low literacy levels across the country. In the world, literacy is generally a significant issue. 780 million people plus are basically functionally illiterate or low basic literacy skills. 54% of the US population lack proficiency above 6th grade level. And 22 million people in the US are without a high school diploma. What's remarkable about that statistic is that 63% of all jobs within the next 2 years are going to require at least a high school diploma, at the very least. So the numbers really get much more staggering and when we look and dig deeper. But I want to be mindful of the bridge and the bridge that we talk. And I think the bridge needs to start with a discussion about words, and that words really do matter. If we're going to change the way we work with men and women that are incarcerated and behind our walls as they come home, or people with a criminal background, then we have to be mindful of the language that we use. And words really do matter. Words like inmate, ex-con, ex-felon, or felon are all things that are triggers, just like there are triggers in words when we talk about racial equity and diversity and inclusion. So I want to be mindful today of the words that we use when we talk about our participants and our students, because they're students. Whether you're a student in a classroom inside of a prison or you're a student when you come home, you may have other monikers that kind of represent who you are in different respects. You may be a felon to some. you may be an inmate to some. But when we talk about literacy and education, the bottom line is we're all people. When you look at me and my background, we're just individuals, and individual or person first language is really important as we have these discussions about education. And I want you to think of that when you talk to your students and you work with participants in programs, that they really are students, but they're also individuals, and they need to be treated as individuals. I remember I'm getting ready to travel next week. I'm going to St. Petersburg to speak at the Florida conference, and then to Cape May, New Jersey. And I remember the first time I spoke in Cape May, I had been out about a year, and I was asked to speak at the Correctional Educators Conference. And I had everyone in the room stand up, and I asked them 4 questions. And by the 3rd question, everyone in the room had been seated. And by the 3rd question, every single person in that room had committed an offense which could have found them in a federal prison. So I want to be mindful of, the choices that we make in life. And sometimes, Adam, there's a great book by called The Second Mountain. And The Second Mountain is all about, you go through this journey in life and you reach the top of the mountain and something sends you back down the mountain. And granted, you may not fall as far as I've fallen, but when you go down the mountain, life really isn't about the first climb. It's really all about the second one. It's all about what are you doing to climb that second mountain? What are all the lessons that you've learned? And it's by David Brooks, who's a New York Times columnist. He's got a great book called The Second Mountain. So if you ever get a chance to read it, definitely a must read. Education in our prisons and jails, we know that 43% of adults in poverty have low literacy levels. We also know that you're 8 times more likely to go to prison if you have a low literacy level. And yet 70% of the inmates fall into that category. In the incarceration rates for students, obviously, that are dropping out of high school are 63 times greater than those that have graduated college. And what's significant about that is with COVID and the COVID pivot that's going on right now, we're going to see so many more participants that are dropping out of college that we're going to need to reach out to try to find how we connect. So overall, the reality is that 94% of all men and women that are behind bars are going to come home at some point in time. And if we do nothing for them, if we don't do anything to help support them, then the reality is, well, it's not really rocket science what's going to happen. A lot of people go back to their old ways and things that they've done before. And yet we just don't do enough. 23% of inmates participate in job training behind the walls. And we should be training and giving skill development across the board to everyone. We should be doing digital literacy, teaching digital literacy across the board for everyone in our system. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in a minute. So some of the things that you should want to understand is that education behind the walls truly makes sense. Education behind the walls reduces violence in prison and jails. And it does that because it gives them purpose and meaning and something to do, and really drives people to want to think about what's their next step when they get out. It increases the odds of post-release employment. When you take classes inside and you can go and take college classes, or you can take certification programs where you're getting that skill set that you need, that's part of it. It makes financial sense. You're actually helping in the whole scheme of things, allowing someone not to go back into the system and giving them an opportunity to succeed with a job and a career pathway when they come home, is putting money back into our economy, getting people hired. And just by taking one class inside of our walls, just one class could reduce the rate of recidivism by 43%. And then there's just the common sense that it's just the right thing to do by increasing educational opportunities for men and women that are behind the walls. Interesting way I describe this when I speak generally is that if you were to think of this fast flowing water that's outside of all of our prisons and jails, our job as educators and administrators is to take men and women that are leaving those prison facilities and help them jump over that water. Because if they get stuck in that water, what ends up happening is they flow back right into those same communities where they gotten themselves into trouble before. And we need to build those bridges, right? We need to build the bridges to help people get over that water that's so fast flowing and moving. Education is really a matter of building bridges. We talked about the likelihood of going back if there's not that skill set. But within 2025, that number's gone up recently. There are going to be more and more jobs that are going to require something more than a high school diploma. So I want to talk about this a second. So I sit at these tables now, which are really remarkable. But I was on a call on Monday with the Department of Education and also the Department of Labor. So we've been, for years, we've worked in these silos where the Department of Education does the thing of getting people smarter, right? That's awesome, getting people smarter. And the Department of Labor has done all this work in getting people back to work, right? And skill development and apprenticeships and all those great things. And we'll talk about them in a minute. But we've yet to figure out that those silos need to be broken. They actually need to be brought together, because it is bringing adult education back into the workforce, which is going to give people that need the support, those jobs. It's going to give them that opportunity. So let me just explain. We're working now and talking about this huge infrastructure bill in Washington, which is awesome that they're putting money into infrastructure and opening up all these jobs and opportunities, right? But the people that need it most are the people that are the people with the lowest levels of education that are in poverty. And those are people that need the education to get into those jobs. So we should be providing more and more adult education support and upskilling support to get them to a point where they can take those AI jobs and those wonderful advanced jobs and technical jobs that are going to be coming down the pike. So breaking those silos is going to be part of our job. And there's a lot of ways we can be talking about doing it. We're going to talk about them today as well. I just want to throw that on your radar screen. So it starts with the foundation at the bridge. It starts with basic math and reading support. It starts with that foundation of instructional tools that can help give them the skills to succeed. And that means in high school equivalency. It means, preparing them those bridge programs for post-secondary. It means basic upskilling. I run programs now that are, it's funny, when I was away in prison, I had never driven a tractor trailer in my life. And the guys were asking for a CDL program. So I was like, okay, well, what do I know? And they said, well, you don't understand. The problem is we can't pass the test. Like, we can't read well enough, or we don't know some of the math. And so I ran a CDL program behind the walls, and I taught them how to pass the test, how to take the test, how to pass the test. And all of the several men that were CDL drivers that found themselves behind the walls, they stood right next to me. It's kind of this IET thing. And they stood right next to me and they said, this is what you need to know when you take your tests. And this is what you know about the trailer and how to drive and all the practical things. So really upskilling people, but teaching them in a contextualized way of what the job and career opportunities are all about is so important. And I know Todd mentioned financial literacy and financial fluency. Absolutely. There's a great book that I just got, it's very timely, from this is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It's called A Financial Empowerment Toolkit. Just got it today. It's incredible. Totally free. The government sends them out for free. And I'll make sure everybody has the link. But I ordered it for all my students so that they could get it. And I run a lot of different programs, so a lot of boxes came in today. And then thinking about career and technical training into a desired career pathway. So I want you all to stop thinking about a job. When we talk about adult education and moving into workforce development, I took the word job out of my vocabulary, because we can't think about this as a job. We need to think about these as careers. A job is something that you take because you have to do it, not because you want to do it. A career is something that you want to do. And statistically, men and women that do things because they want to do them, they stick to it, right? Because they love to do it. Those people that don't like to do something so much are not really going to stick with it. So let's talk about career opportunities. The reality for people that have gone through the justice system is that there really are tremendous barriers. There are 44,000 documented barriers to employment. And Jeff Korsenik, who is a good friend of mine, he's a executive at Fifth Third Bank in Chicago, wrote this book called Getting Talent Back to Work. And he actually cites to this study that was done about all these documented barriers. What I didn't really understand, the gravity of it, was that 70% of those barriers to that men and women face coming home involve gainful employment, involve getting back to the jobs or the career pathway. And it does all start with literacy. So I'm going to get on my soapbox. So my soapbox is that we, as a country, as a world, need to understand we are in a digital world. And digital literacy is one of the keys to success. Why we don't mandate digital literacy across every correctional institution and reentry program and Title II agency and Title I provider, digital literacy is so important, even more so in corrections. And here's why. When men and women come home from prison, the first thing we want them to do is get a job, get a career, go get a job, get that career, right? And what do? We say, okay, John, you're home now. We want you to go get that application filed. Go ahead, go right on there, over there. There's a computer and just go on that mouse, right? And literally they go over and they're looking around the seat for where the mouse is, like it's something that's running around the floor, because they may have never been exposed to a mouse before. So being able to get online and understanding that digital literacy is so important, we should be teaching that behind our walls. And there are so many online tools today that are robust, that are strong, that are easy, and that are safe. So I asked this question at a conference recently, and I said, if anyone can stand up and give me one good reason, one solid good reason why we don't have digital literacy in our prisons and in our jails across the country, you tell me why. And I don't buy that it's money. I don't buy that it's money, and I don't buy it's security, because you can give me an old laptop, and I got 150 laptops delivered to me. They're all rebuilt laptops I'm giving to people. It just doesn't take a lot. And we can have drop-down things that can, platforms that are available now that are safe and secure, but simply a standalone computer that allows someone to put their resume on it, right? Or a standalone computer teaches them Excel, or how to use Microsoft Word. I mean, really simple things can mean the world to men and women coming home. And I really want to make this, and this is one of my big pushes across the country as I speak, digital literacy is just so important. And I know that providing them the tools when they get out is one thing, but then access is a whole nother issue, how they can access it. So we'll get into that a bit, but I am a very big proponent. Building the bridge means understanding the talent pool, understanding what's out there, and doing things a little bit differently than we've been doing before. There's a lot of innovations in teaching, especially with COVID. We'll talk about some of them, but innovations in teaching are thinking about virtual reality programming, right? How do you bring programming in a safe way into your classrooms? And we may not be able to, in the corrections or reentry setting, actually getting people up onto scaffolds or into big buildings and construction sites, but virtual reality is a cool tool that allows you to do it. I did one recently. I'm really afraid of heights, and I was in a virtual reality OSHA training program that put me up in a building in Philadelphia, and I was under construction. Within minutes, I hit my head on a beam and fell 60 floors down to my demise, but it was really realistic. And it gave me a good idea of what it's like to be up 60 stories above of the ground. And then looking at other things like inside out connectors. We should be starting in our corrections and reentry programs, bringing employers inside, bringing training providers inside, connecting them with Title II providers that are providing education. And that reentry is just a point in time, but it really starts the first day you go into prison and should never stop, because always when you should be looking at those connections and how you blend employers into all of this. Well, I'm going to show you some examples in a little while. Peer mentoring, actually peer mentoring and peer support. I'm on the board of a company called PD Green, which is a nonprofit that actually provides college students with an opportunity to tutor the men and women that are inside of our prisons. And now they've pivoted and they're doing it on the outside. But peer mentoring and professional mentoring, helping people with that one-on-one support, that added extra touch that gets them over those fraction problems that they struggle with and some of the reading challenges. IET and corrections, integrated educational training, for those that don't know, is provided for in WIOA, and it is where a math instructor is in the classroom, and he's in the same classroom as a carpentry instructor. And while they're teaching carpentry, he's teaching fractions. What an awesome model, right? Because it's giving you the best of both worlds. I'm doing an IET and corrections program for OCTE, Department of Education, and we launched over the summer. We're assisting on providing support for 6 IETs and corrections around the country. Just remarkable. And I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in that space, but I'd love to see them across the country and in facilities everywhere. Post-secondary support. So we've heard a lot of talk about Pell Grant and the Pell Grant window opening. The one thing we haven't talked about is the reality that it's going to take a little while, right? Pell Grant window isn't going to open up that fast, probably within the next 2 years. But opening Pell Grant support windows for training programs, as well as post-secondary support inside and outside of our prison walls, is really important. And then recognizing the barriers of Pell Grants is also really important. So there are challenges men and women have because they may have been defaulted in loans while they were in prison and student loans, and may not make them eligible. So talking through some of those challenges and making sure that we can get them there is half of the battle, half of the game. There was a great study recently that came out and talked about fundamental supports that states should have in building their bridge for adult education and corrections. And things like funding was one fundamental block. Offerings, giving access to a full range of programs and that really meet the labor market trends. And then lack of restrictions inside of correctional education facilities and eliminating both statutory and administrative restrictions. And then the incentives, providing incentives and supports to help build those bridges. And the incredible thing, and it was done by the Justice Center for Council on State Governments. And in this report that came out was remarkable, but not a single state, not one state in our entire country successfully met all 4 of those fundamental building blocks, not one. And I challenge you, and I put the study and the report of all these building blocks and the resources that you'll be getting from this, but to look at each of these to find out what are the opportunities of working both behind and beyond the walls to help make those bridges stronger, and in particular, some of those challenges that they face. I talked a little about IET and corrections, and IET, again, is adult education mixing with workforce preparedness, getting people back into the workforce, and then doing it in a workforce with workforce-specific occupational training. So you're preparing them. You know, one of the things I do across the country now is not only workforce development, helping people get back into the jobs, but actually teaching them how to keep the job. You know, getting the job is one thing, but keeping the job is something totally different. And for returning citizens is often one of the biggest challenges. And we see it in our classrooms, we also see it, but when people go through the justice system, there's a re-socialization that has to occur. And I'll give you an example. When you're inside of the prison walls, often there's this red zone that's around you. And when people walk into that red zone, your antennas go up. It usually means that trouble might be starting or happening. And, you know, coming home, people are in that red zone all the time. And, you know, we talk about things like conflict resolution and just being on time and how to look someone in the eye and how to be honest and transparent. So one of the things I tell my students is that it's important that you tell your story. Look, at the end of today, you may not remember a lot, right? You may not remember about all the details, but you're going to remember, you know, there was a white lawyer who was on the call today and he talked to us about being in prison, right? And education. You're going to remember the story. And it's the story that our students tell, which can be most impactful in helping guide them to education and helping them understand, you know, their pathway and what they need to really be successful. I mentioned links earlier. So I've been blessed in January. I came on as the moderator for the Correctional and Reentry Community of Practice, which is in links. It's links.ed.gov, and it's totally free. It is a free resource. So this is one community of practice, but there are many. I was on a call yesterday with our the disabilities communities of practice, and you can join as many as you want. There are professional development tools on there. There's a whole bunch of different things. The nicest thing about links is that it's a community where you can talk to your colleagues. You could talk, and when you have a question or you need a resource, if you pop it in the links community, there are people from around the country that will jump on and say, I have this program, I have this model, I can share this. In August, it tends to be a little bit slower in links. And in the correctional and reentry community of practice, I recently, I had 18 holes of golf. So it was my links course, get the pun. And every day I posted something different, a different resource, a different tool, a different issue. And that was kind of remarkable. I also should tell you that I'm the secretary of the board of directors of COABE, the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, also another great tool. And if you're not part of COABE, you need to jump in, because COABE is a remarkable organization that the Coalition on Adult Education is, I know Michael Matos is on here, but COABE is remarkable because it connects adult educators across the country and gives you resources and tools far beyond anything you could imagine, but is also the advocacy arm for making sure that you're well funded and that you get the tools and resources to do your job. So it's a Coalition on Basic Adult Education. So I challenge you to jump in on that. So what's happened over the last year is that we've seen this COVID pivot. We've seen many programs that have shut down. We've seen people behind the walls that need educational support are really not getting it. Many classrooms have shut down or have gone to paper, and the training programs have been shut down. And we need to think about starting them back up and doing it in a meaningful way. We need to think about engaging men and women that are coming home and getting them into those programs that maybe have been stopped, and making those connections. COVID has hit all of us in our country tremendously hard, but we've also learned a lot of lessons. The lesson in adult education is we can do this, right? We can do this. We can do this virtually. We can get people on their cell phones, and we can get them logged into programs, and we can get them learning in a way that they can connect with. And so, when God hands you lemons, you make lemonade. And we've been making lemonade, and now we have to make it for our country, and we have to do this in a more meaningful way. One of the things that are out there are tools when we talk about COVID and really understanding how impactful it's been in our country. The Marshall Project has a listing of your state, which keeps current records, state by state look of how COVID has impacted the individuals and men and women that are behind the walls. And I suggest that you check that out, because it really is important for you to understand how many people in your state have been affected by COVID. I don't believe that our bridge is just one small little rope that goes across. I think there are many beams. I think that education is just one piece of this. Providing somebody with a GED is incredible and awesome, but because you do that, like getting someone a job, doesn't mean that their housing insecurity goes away. It doesn't mean that their medical addictions go away, or that the behavioral health problems or challenges go away. It doesn't mean that their legal problems go away, or that automatically they get identification or transportation, or all of those things that we're working on, that they go away. They don't. This takes a village. It takes many beams to get people across this bridge, and it takes all of us working together to make that happen. So those bridges this is one of my favorite slides, and it's one of my favorite ones because of the story behind it. So in this picture, if you're not on or you can't see, is a gentleman that's looks like he's making something. He's a chef. So there's an organization called Edwin's, which is out. It's a restaurant, a 5-star restaurant in Cleveland, Ohio. And Edwin's works with returning citizens and men and women gone through the system. And this gentleman, right before COVID, I was out in Cleveland and went to the restaurant, and I ordered bananas Foster. So I hadn't ordered bananas Foster in, I don't know how long, but this gentleman came out after the meal and he made bananas Foster in front of us. And I captured this picture because at the end of this presentation that he did for us, making bananas Foster, the smile on his face was as if he was the jockey and just won the Kentucky Derby. The success that was all over him, that he had a trade of accomplishment, was remarkable. And I wish that for every single one of my students and participants, that they get that feeling of accomplishment. And a lot of this is in dealing with things like the REAL Act and Pell Grant relief, making sure that employers understand the challenges that men and women are going through, but knowing that education is an important piece of it. I have a program now with TJX or Marshalls, where Marshalls provides an opportunity for all of our students that want to work, that they could take an hour off of their day at the end of the day, or an hour and a half, and they can go into a GED classroom and they can get their high school equivalency. How awesome is that? Employer engagement in all of this is something that's been so lacking over the years, and bringing it to the forefront and showing employers that this is what needs to happen and how we can do it, with training and upskilling and getting them smarter, just makes good sense to employers, right? It's their return on investment. And it does make a huge difference in the workforce because it gives people keeps them advancing through employment. And that is ultimately the goal as you go through education and college and post-secondary, training and skill sets. Talk about occupational licensing. Occupational and licensing is also a barrier to many people coming home. That's starting to change a little bit, where we're getting people into trades and getting them back into the things that they want to do. So on our bridge, as we cross it, there are adult literacy agencies that are available that can help support. And they should be getting involved inside of our prison walls and in reentry programs and in programs where, SNAP programs and programs where people are, need that support to get further along. Career one-stops or career links or American Job Centers across the country. They're a great vehicle for us to be able to get those people in so that we can get them smarter, start blending those programs together. I believe community colleges are way underutilized when we talk about men and women coming home. But the challenge with community colleges, quite frankly, is that we don't prepare people for what's going to happen in that community college. And bridge programming should be embedded in all programs where there's a link to community colleges for post-secondary, and being really able to guide them and say, okay, are you prepared? And what happens when when you're going to be in this math class, and are you ready for this? And these are the challenges, and you're going to need to set some time aside. And that means putting yourself into a room where it's quiet, and really helping people navigate those challenges so that the attrition rate of going to college and getting that support is increased. Apprenticeships in the United States are now moving forward, but apprenticeships are one of the tools in your toolbox that you have as you build this bridge, which should be looked at because it's blending work and that work environment also with a job where they're making some money, that career has started. And what's really amazing about these opportunities is that apprenticeships they're helping people advance to move forward and really giving them that push right in the right direction. Employer and employer engagement and engaging unions, workforce development boards are all part of that bridge. They all are different beams and supports that are helping us to move forward and to push across it. And they're things that we have to consider. I talked a little about making the bridge stronger, and there are a lot of free tools that are available for you. Links for one, we talked about COABE, the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, another great tool. Google has some free tools that are out there now, and specifically targeting men and women that are justice involved, that are moving through the justice space. And then obviously really engaging private industry in education. There's a great resource tool that's out there, a book that that we often use, and it's all different sectors. So it's communications, and it's and these are in upskilling programs, and communication, and some of the other ones are warehousing and logistics and IT, and all these books can be used in one classroom where people pick the career pathway that they want. And when the teacher says turn to page 26, they're all doing fractions, but they're doing them in their industry sector. Now that's contextualized learning, and that's really something that will make a difference to adult learners across the country as they navigate some of these barriers. There are some great resource tools of showing how you did. Unfortunately, I don't think of them are spot on. I know COABE has on their platform, Educate and Elevate, has these great tools where you can see what's the data, how many people have gone through programs, how many people are you touching, what's the return on investment. Make no mistake, we are all, as educators, advocates. Our students are our stories. They are our outcomes. We need to be mindful that funding dollars for adult literacy, although they've gone up in the last 2 years, thanks to the work of COABE and a lot of organizations jumping on this bandwagon, we need to be advocates for our students. And the very best way of doing that is telling our students' story. You know, when you have a success story, document it. Get them in front of your cell phone and say, you know, we want to know, how do you feel about doing this and getting your high school equivalency? And what are you going to be doing next? And where's the job that you got? And what are the tools that you got from us? And what are the lessons that you learned? And then being able to share them with legislators and with people across the country that are doing this work that can really make sure funding dollars are there for the programs. I often hear funding is one of the biggest challenges facing people. And I think we need to be mindful of, you know, we need to be the advocates. We need to get out there and really make that bridge strong, right? And you're the ones that are doing it. So adult educators and administrators across the country and Illinois, you guys are awesome because you are making that bridge strong. You're helping people get to that success and you're building that bridge. So I want to give you a little bit of a lot of thank you, because we often don't see, especially in the correctional education space, we don't see the product of our work, right? When you're behind the walls or you're working in a Title II program, oftentimes our students move on, but we don't see it. I was with Secretary Stump a few years ago, our Assistant Secretary of Education, and said to me, Jeff, tell me, what are the numbers? What are your results? And I said, Mr. Secretary, I can't tell you that. And he said, well, no, Jeff, I know you do great work and I know you keep the data, right? Because you've been doing this a long time. I said, yeah. And I said, the reality for me is that our metrics can be found in the 5-year-old child that goes to school with a full belly, with nice sneakers, with a jacket, and with mom and dad right with him, and proud of his parents that they got their high school equivalency and they're working and they're successful and they're going to go on to college because of that drive that they have in their family. And those are metrics that, I'm sorry, but we just can't put numbers to. We can tell the story, right? And that's what we need to do. We need to be able to tell our story. So I promised you, I'm going to give you a few minutes for questions, but I provided you with a whole host of resources that I'm hoping that you will take a look at and use. These are things that I've mentioned today. They're resources that are incredibly easy to use when for support, but more importantly, to help tell your story. One of them I will point out is a great tool by SHRM called Getting Talent Back to Work, which is an 8-module certification that tells you all about helps you work with returning citizens and people in the justice space. And it's totally free. My staff calls it free 95, right? Totally free, and feel free to jump in and take it because you get a certification for it. But more importantly, you'll really learn some of the barriers and challenges and how to deal with them as you work to get your students smarter and back to work. The fact sheets that I referred to from COABE can be found at Educate and Elevate, and those are wonderful. If you want to connect with me, you can do so on my website, which is jeffrey-abramowitz.com. There are also some great books. One is Getting Talent Back to Work by Jeff Korsenik, Think Again by Adam Grant I mentioned, and also this great book by Damon Santola, which is all about how you make change happen. And the reality is all He bases his book on the Black Lives Matter movement, although he talks about a lot of different movements. But really, that change happens from the bottom up, right? It doesn't start with legislators in Washington. It starts with your students. It starts with you. And you can make that change happen. And as you do, things get better and better. And so I encourage you to check that out. And I'll leave my information up for a little bit. So we do have a few minutes left. We have about 4 minutes or 3 or 4 minutes left. And I want to open the door up for any questions that you have. And for this, I would ask, unmute yourself and just jump in. And if you have any questions, anything that I talked about that you're curious about, or you want me to dive a little bit further into, give you some space here.
So Jeff, we did have a question in the chat from Adele Wheeler. Not sure if you're able to read that, but it says, is there a fear in Illinois that the individuals will get on inappropriate sites when you were referring to digital literacy or hack into the system? What are the barriers? We need people in power to make decisions and give the thumbs up. Just think how effective we would be with just the addition of a teacher laptop and smart board.
Yeah, that is an awesome question. So I will tell you that I was out in Austin a few weeks ago and spoke at the International Correctional Educators Association in Austin. And I went to, there were a bunch of providers there and vendors there that are doing these digital literacy platforms and just generally platforms inside of the walls. And then I asked them that question repeatedly. As a matter of fact, I make it routine to ask them, how safe is your system? How secure is your system? And these systems that are out now that can be plopped down and are provided for correctional facilities across the country are so safe and so secure that it's not a matter of tampering. We've heard this challenge before because years ago, 4, 5, 6 years ago, they had some challenges in this space where there was a concern about going onto the internet and access, but that's not so anymore. Now our systems are so solid and so good, and companies are doing this inside of prisons. So, and those are the prisons and facilities that need to step up and say, it's working for us, it can work for anyone. And I would be gladly connect people in Illinois to the work that's being done across the country where they have active programs, where this is not a concern, where they're solid in the security levels that they have. And more importantly, they're opening the door up to these platforms that are providing not only skill development and training, but educational tools like tablets that are being used and online programming that is very safe. So there just is not an excuse anymore. The bandwidth, we just need to get, sometimes change is hard and it's slow. And it's been really slow when it comes to digital literacy, but we need to show them that it can work. And even if you just pilot one program, just start by piloting one program with us or with an organization, and hopefully they'll understand that it can be done safely, it can be done securely, and it can be done effectively. And it really can change the world. It can change the world that we live in adult literacy in the correctional space. Any other questions?
There are not any other questions in the chat. While we're giving everyone kind of a minute to ponder and think about if they have any other questions, I did want to reiterate just a couple of housekeeping things. Jeff, I'm
I'll
gonna
stop my share. Yeah.
steal the slides from you here.
There you go.
So I just wanted to thank everyone for your participation on this session, and you should be able to complete the end of session evaluation on the Whova app under session evaluations on the side. I believe it's under each session. And then I also wanted to put a plug in for all of our social media. We have some engagement and some giveaways, some Amazon gift card giveaways if you're interested. If you participate in our social media on our Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, you can find us on our ICSPS Facebook or on the Adult Ed Professional Development Network Facebook, as well as our Twitter and Instagram accounts. And then we have some hashtags as well. So I wanted to put a plug in for those. Jeff, a couple more questions have come through. I think you're answering them. Are there certain careers that you recommend that are better for those who are justice involved?
Yeah, so There are. So there are some careers that are just not right yet in the industry. For example, the medical field is often challenging for men and women coming home because the medical field hasn't cleared, they haven't reached the level where they're clearing people with backgrounds into that field yet. And then they're be mindful of there's some jobs that are just not appropriate for people coming home, depending on the offense. Some people that have sexually related offenses just can't be in a school. But I do think that the big targets are they're targeting industry sectors like logistics and AI and being creative. I don't necessarily believe anymore that there is a sector that's not open for reentry. I think that every sector is opening their doors a little bit wider, but you need to be mindful of the occupational restrictions in Illinois of what people can do. I get frustrated when we have a training program to something that there's no, because of the state law, they're not allowed to do that occupation. So be real careful about the things that are that you can and can't do within your state. That'd be important. There's one last question. We've successfully hosted GED programs in Lake County Jail and want to further other programs. Any ideas with entrepreneurship and blueprint reading? Absolutely. Those are classic. So the one thing I love about entrepreneurship is that it really teaches you something that you can get self-employed with. I have a lot of men and women that have some IT background that are now going online with Upwork, and they're actually making a really good living in online doing website development and doing things online. And entrepreneurship and that piece of it, that skill set is really important. And let's face it, we know a lot of men and women that are in jail were there for pharmaceutical trade, a different kind of pharmaceutical trade. And they had a skill set in selling, right? And entrepreneurship. And same thing with blueprint reading. Those are things that, again, digital literacy becomes important because everything's on CAD now. So you want to make sure that when you do them, that you're using the most advanced tools and techniques in order to get them smarter. So thank you for that question.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you to all of our attendees for participating today. I'm going to go ahead and close us out. We do have a break. I believe it's our lunch break. And we will be back, I believe, at 12:45 is our next session. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.